Frederick Douglass was right when he said, there's no progress without struggle. And I have been in this struggle since the tender age of 14 years old in Jackson, Mississippi. Now I'm 82, but I'm not going to leave the struggle. I'm going to stay in the struggle that black folks deserve to have at the end of the day a fair share, and truly it will be for us justice, inclusion, and equality of opportunity. And at the end of the day, peace. You can't have peace if you don't have justice.
He was 14 years old when he was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. The failure to punish anyone for the crime made headlines across the country and around the world, exposing the racial hatred and unequal justice for blacks that was pervasive in the segregated South, where laws dictated where blacks could eat and drink and where they could sleep.
When I picked up that Jet magazine at the age of 14 in my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi, and saw that brutal head of Emmett Till, and I ran to Mr. Megawale Evers, who was the newly appointed field director of the NAACP in my city of Jackson, and told him how upset I was. He was the elder who said, don't just be angry, don't just be upset. Let's be smart. Why not organize a youth council of the NAACP here in Jackson so that you and your young friends will learn how to fight this evil of racism and injustice in a smart, strategic way. And from that admonition, I organized the first youth council in the fall of 1955, in the month of September. And then Mr. Evers asked my mother in the spring of 1956 if I could join him in riding to San Francisco, this city, to attend the 47th annual meeting of the NAACP. And my, that was an exciting experience. At the age of 15, we left Jackson, rode to Vicksburg, from Vicksburg, Shreveport to Dallas, Dallas up to Amarillo, Amarillo down to Santa Fe, down to Flagstaff to Needles, and then from Needles on up through the valley. And when we got here on that morning and saw all of that water, what a new world was opened up to me. We crossed that Bay Bridge, and I didn't have money to stay in the hotel. But thank God for my mother's connection with a friend of hers who had a relative who lived here in San Francisco, right over here on Fulton Street at Fulton and Baker, the Hutchinson family, across from New Strangers Home Baptist Church. And during that session, I walked 11 blocks down to the Civic Center, to all of the sessions where we were debating, fighting to be free by 63. That was one of the slogans that was around the convention center. And it was at that meeting that I first met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Miss Rosa Parks. Dr. King spoke for Youth Night. But little did I know then that when after meeting Roy Wilkins, Thurgood Marshall, A. Philip Randolph, all of those giants, Bishop Stephen Gill Spotswood of the AME Zion Church, little did I know that on that Sunday morning when I left the session, I came to this church and I sat on that fourth pew right there. Why did I come here? Because I had heard of the great Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, Sr., who was the first black who ran for the Board of Supervisors in 1945. And he could have been elected to the board if there had not been racism here in this city, and if we had not had some blacks who were so conservative and backwards that they felt that a preacher should not be involved in the political process. But I came to this church and sat there at the age of 15. But the Lord ordained it to be so that in 1976, I was invited to come from my second pastorate, the historic Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, to be senior pastor. And I've had the distinction of being engaged in the struggle, preaching the gospel of personal and social salvation, and making sure that I would live out what my Sunday school teacher taught what my name meant. When Miss Essie Randall told me at the age of 8, Amos, your name is a great name. In Hebrew it means the prophet who bears the burdens of the people. And I've sought to bear the burdens of my people and all oppressed people. I've fought for gay rights. I've fought for women's rights. I was kicked out of the California State Baptist Convention because I licensed and ordained a woman to preach in 1984. But I knew that you can't become that which you hate, and that if you didn't want anyone else discriminating against you because of the color of your skin, you should not discriminate against other people because of their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation, or whatever distinctives they might have. The only thing we should expect of others is to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with whatever principles or faith traditions they may have. And when we do that, we will move toward getting closer to that day in which we will realize that beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King, my teacher, envisioned, in which every person would be respected, encouraged, and given a fair opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
What Dr. King taught a young Amos Brown was moved to mirror, taking Dr. King's notes on the page to a living struggle for civil rights on the stage of history.
When we gathered in Washington, it was that unusual experience of seeing so many people who were peaceful, respectful, and determined to be about the business of working for jobs, justice, and peace.
On that day, the young Amos Brown caught that spirit, setting him on the firm foundation of his life's mission.
We didn't have time to come with hate in our minds, our bones, and our veins. We came as people of the Spirit.
Adding that this has always been his calling.
And you're going to be the one, show the responsibility of bearing the burdens of our people. God is going to use you to do great things.
And decades later, Dr. Brown teaches that to deal with the dream, we must deal with reality. He's one of Northern California's biggest proponents of reparations. He's leading the charge to see people wronged repaid.
And what Dr. King dealt with in the first half of that speech was this bounce check that had come back insufficient funds. when it came to the payment of what America owed us because of that crime that was committed against our humanity. That was my first pastor, St. Paul's, there in Quaker Amish territory. And I taught philosophy and religion at Cheney State College. That's our oldest historically black institution. Leslie Pinckney Hill was the moving spirit behind the founding of Cheney. And as was the case historically, the Quakers were right on this issue of regarding and respecting the humanity of black folks. But all of these other folks who claimed that they were religious or spiritual were frauds. They supported the enslavement of blacks and have unfortunately been on the wrong side of history when it came to integration and the empowerment of black folks. So when you say Philadelphia, that's a tender spot for me. And also it's a tender spot because many people don't even know of the great contributions that came from the minds and the hands of black folk there in Philadelphia. We sing that song now, which has been the banner hymn for all liberation struggles. We shall overcome. But how many know that it was a United Methodist preacher named Charles Albert Tindley who wrote a hymn in 1901 entitled, I'll Overcome Someday. That hymn inspired peace singer Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks at the Highlander Folk School in 1960, there in the state of Tennessee, where, by the way, I should say parenthetically, unfortunately, years before the Ku Klux Klan was birthed at Pulaski to terrorize black people and to keep us from having our constitutional right to vote during Reconstruction. And also they were the instrument in part to make sure that we would have no success during Reconstruction. That reign of terror persisted up through the 20s, even to the time that a lady named Mary Turner near Valdosta, Georgia, was lynched by some evil white men. Why did they lynch her? Because she spoke up for her husband, who also was wrongly accused of a crime that he was not guilty of. Because she spoke out, because she spoke truth, she lost her life. And she was 8 months pregnant. 8 months. But these evil white men lynched her, and with knives ripped her stomach open, set her afire. The unborn child fell to the ground. And there were pictures taken of these persons doing what? Stomping the body of the child into the ground. That is a fact. That is no alternative fact. No made up stuff. And this is why America and all of Western Europe has a debt to pay to black folks because of that evil of racism, bigotry, and terror that were perpetrated against my ancestors. And like Zacchaeus in the Bible, who met Jesus one day, but his meeting Jesus was not about his personal salvation and going to heaven. For in the dialogue, in that conversation that he had with this prophet of Nazareth, he told on himself. He said, Master, in essence, I know I've been this tax collector representing Rome as a middleman, and I have wronged many people by taking from them their property, by charging them more than they should have been charged for taxes. And he said, anyone whom I have wronged, I want to pay back fourfold. And Jesus said to him, salvation has come to your house. Thus for him, salvation was not personal salvation. It also involved social salvation, political salvation, and making amends for the wrongs that he had committed against those poor, regular citizens who lived in Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. So as a preacher, as a historian, and as a servant of the people, I have always put this issue of reparations in context. What was the scene of the crime? Who was the perpetrator of the crime? And also making sure that the punishment for the crime would be equal and consistent. And to that end, further, what we must learn in the United States, that when you talk about government or political structures paying back, you've got to be exact and factual. And fact number one, reparations from the very beginning in 1865, when those 20 black preachers met with General Sherman and Secretary of War Stanton. General Sherman asked the spokesperson, Reverend Garrison Frazier, what do you feel the Union owes your people? What does the Union owe the slaves? And Reverend Frazier said, General, I can't speak for everybody, but at least we ought to have, from my perspective, he said in essence, some of this land that we have been slaving on for all of these years. And from that response of that spokesperson representing those 20 black preachers who were the leaders of the community, the idea of 40 acres and a mule evolved, setting aside 40 acres from the coast of Florida up into South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, the old slave states. That's what reparation was about. It was about land. Land. Yes, we need money. Yes, we've been economically deprived. But basically, blacks in America must understand, if you don't have land, if you don't have real estate, you are shortchanging yourself from having that foundational base for intergenerational wealth. Now, unfortunately, after that field order number 15 was established by General Sherman, what happened? When Mr. Abraham Lincoln, our president of this nation, the one who signed that proclamation, was assassinated. Andrew Johnson from Tennessee, again, from that racist state, who was vice president of the United States, did everything to destroy 40 acres and a mule, everything to destroy Freedmen's Bureau, and he almost was impeached because of his act. And after he had turned his back on this measure, what happened to us? We were thrown into the peonage system of sharecropping. And again, throughout the South, that sharecropping system was against black people. We were not treated right. We were cheated again. And consequently, that has had a ripple effect. So by way of summary, the first basic thing is we deserve land. And we need to get it and hold on to it, particularly in these communities, these are urban communities where we once had historical areas. Like, for example, there in Philadelphia, in South and West Philadelphia, some of that land in that area and in the state of Pennsylvania should be given to black folks who can qualify for reparations. The next thing that we need is health measures. If you don't have good health, it becomes a moot question as whether or not you're going to be around to make some money or spend some money or even own some land. Black people are the sickest in this nation from all indices, all areas. You already have a system in place where people of our citizenry are to have benefits from health departments. So in these urban communities throughout America, we ought to have free health care because we have been denied too long throughout slavery and throughout the so-called separate but equal period. The other thing that's very important, that's basic, education. Oh, education. Even the good book says, my people perish because of a lack of knowledge. Knowledge. Whether it's spiritual knowledge, academic knowledge, practical knowledge, we were denied that basic opportunity. You know, many people in this nation do not know about this one man, Reverend Josiah Henson. Josiah Henson. We heard a whole lot about Frederick Douglass, a whole lot about Harriet Tubman, a whole lot about Denmark Vesey, but how many know about the name of Josiah Henson? Who was he? He was a Methodist preacher, born in 1789, not far from the White House, there in near Montgomery County, Maryland, near Bethesda. But at the age of 18, what happened to him? This overseer caught him with a spelling book in his hand. And he said to him, "Where did you get that spelling book from?" He said, "I bought it." "How did you buy it?" "From the fruit that I sold at the market in Washington." And this overseer got a cane and beat him unmercifully and said in so many words, "No end will ever learn how to read or write on this plantation." At the age of 13. But Josiah Henson, because he had something on the inside that he was going to let anybody break his spirit, lived to be 93 years old. And even though he was enslaved for about 40 years, and even though he witnessed his father being beaten 100 lashes by this evil white overseer, in the face of all of that brutality, again, that didn't stop him. He was sold into enslavement down to the state of Kentucky. But from Kentucky, he had a will to escape. And he fled up to Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was there at Cincinnati where he met the Underground Railroad. And as the leader, he led 118 blacks to freedom up to Canada. And he established in 1830 in Ontario a place called Don. And what was Don about? His acquiring over 200 acres of land, and on that land he built a school and also an economically thriving black community. And this man, Reverend Josiah Henson, went to England twice and spoke to Queen Victoria about the evils, brutality, and the atrocities that he went through and his family, and the evils of enslavement in America. And that's why the British, even though they were complicit and were wrong, were the first to stop enslavement around 1807 to 1808. Before this nation even got close to doing anything about it, with a war of 1861. But this man, that many don't know about, Josiah Henson, was responsible for impacting the minds of even Queen Victoria twice. And he also met with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And when he met the Archbishop of Canterbury, what did the Archbishop say to him? "My, I have never heard a Negro speak so eloquently as you do. What school did you go to?" said he. Reverend Josiah Henson responded, "I graduated from the University of Adversity. I graduated from the University of Adversity." The Archbishop even further said to him, "How did you come to the faith? How did you become a believer in Christianity?" He said, "From my mother teaching me the Lord's Prayer." And we well know in that prayer, there's the line that says, "Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." So thus, Reverend Josiah Henson was a liberating preacher. He was not preaching about just going to heaven on golden streets after a while somewhere where no one had been and come back to tell how it was. But his spirituality was about liberation here in the earth. Now here's the punchline. Josiah Henson was the real Uncle Tom in the flesh. That's where Harriet Beecher Stowe got the idea of writing that novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And the world doesn't know that. But she stole the life experience of this Baptist preacher, who was a man of nobility, a man of service. But what has happened in this nation, the Vaughnvilles of the 1920s took that story of Uncle Tom's Cabin and defamed it, put a spin on it, as if he was a shiftless sellout. He was not, but he was a man of great integrity, and he fought to keep his family together and other families. And more importantly, he was a man for the common good, the summum bonum of all black people. But America, as it often has done in the past, and it still continues to do today, with the nonsense of DeSantis down there in Florida, has told a lie about our humanity, as if we had no history, no culture, made no contribution. But again, Reverend Josiah Henson made a great contribution, along with Frederick Douglass later on, and Harriet Tubman. And that's why we must educate. That's my point. We must enlighten our people. And we need to make sure that the black church today, even when the school system doesn't do right, we should be as it was the day of enslavement. In that day, the school was in the church house. And there's another man who was a great, passionate personality for education. John Meacham, from Virginia, again enslaved man. And do you know, Reverend John Meacham, John Berry Meacham, established what was named the first floating school. The first floating school. When he got to St. Louis, Missouri, back in the day during enslavement, it was against the law for black people to go to school. And anyone who was caught trying to teach some black person was arrested in St. Louis. But what did Reverend John Berry Meacham do? He, as a master carpenter, built on a steamboat a school, and he fled from St. Louis over to Illinois, where he founded a school on that boat. And that school was the beginning of the first university for higher education in the state of Missouri, Lincoln University at Jefferson City, Missouri. So you see how people have always had a passion for education. And even though they denied us having quality education because of that crazy 1896 separate but equal legal stature in America, but we fought, and in spite of the folks trying to keep us from learning, to have our own schools, these historically black colleges that have done a great job of doing so much with so little from so few. So that again reflects how we as a people have achieved in spite of the odds. And what have we achieved? We achieved the sharpening of our minds. What have we achieved? We achieved skills. So much so that the first blood bank in this nation was established by a black man. Dr. Drew.
On September 1st, 1939, bombs from German planes began to rain death upon the people of Poland. Total war exploded across Europe. A whole continent seemed to be bleeding. In New York City, half a world away, Charles Drew established a method to save the wounded. Plasma could save. He had proved it. Proved that plasma could be stored without refrigeration. Proved that plasma could be transfused immediately without the terrible loss of time for sampling and matching. Proved that in cases of shock, burns, and hemorrhages, red cells were not the part of the blood most necessary for recovery. At that critical moment, when blood was engulfing Europe, a black American surgeon had unlocked the door that was to mean life for millions.
So, that education piece is very important. But we also must deal with this economic piece when it comes to reparations in urban communities. What does that mean? We should have our fair share of jobs and contracts. There's some more low-hanging fruit. You look at all these major communities, even with the measure coming from Washington dealing with the infrastructure. Who's getting those jobs, making big bucks, working on the infrastructure, putting down pipes, pavement, dealing with the railroads, dealing with the infrastructure? It's other folks. So you see, this thing of cheating us is present. Not just what happened back in enslavement times, but today.
Well, Ken, the program wrapped up just a short time ago. It was to honor Amos Brown's 40 years of service here at Third Baptist Church. Before a packed house at Third Baptist Church, Willie Brown, Jesse Jackson, Governor Jerry Brown, and former President Bill Clinton came together to honor 40 years of service by Reverend Dr. Amos Brown. While the politicians at the pulpit were circumspect in their remarks, Reverend Brown was not.
Our nation is in one of the worst states it has ever been in its history. This resurgence of racism will destroy this nation.
Reverend Brown says the current divisive political climate is in need of unity.
That's what makes America great. This division that's in the land now is not America. It is the petty, private interest of persons who've been infected by that disease of greed, selfishness, and bigotry. But we ought to be family. But the problem has been, we have been economically deprived because of redlining and because of a denial of a fair opportunity to get jobs and to get contracts in the communities where we are citizens. We are members of this society, and we should have the same opportunity that other folks have had, who have excelled. And we need not say, well, you want a handout. But many don't think about it, or they don't know about it, that white folks got a handout in 1862, when there was that Homestead Act that set aside, gave to white folks 160 acres of land in the Midwest. And also they used black buffalo soldiers and forced them to enforce giving that land to white folks. Many people don't know that, but it's time we tell the truth. But Jesus was right when Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, that the truth shall set you free." But too many lies have been told to create privilege and power only for white folks in this nation. And that needs to stop. This earth, this land is so vast. The psalmist says, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein." And we all should be given our fair share. But that has not happened for black people in this nation. But going back to my childhood days, I have in my office a family tree that was put together by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And behold, what information they unearthed that I never knew. But I began, after they did the research, to know why I've been doing all that I've been doing these years, because it's been in my DNA. My great-great-grandfather, Patrick Brown, going back 5 generations, was born in 1821 in Franklin County, Mississippi. Franklin County is that county where a little hamlet is located, Roxy. And who else was born in Roxy? Richard Wright, who wrote Black Boy and Native Son. And do you know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were able to find the documentation that my great-grandfather Patrick bought 150 acres of land in 1882. 150 acres of land. And even he was given the option of making 3 payments. They had copies of the receipts. Oh yes. And also, they had the record of 3 white men giving him an additional acre of land. And that land was to be used to build a school and a church. And that church became known as the Bethlehem Baptist Church of Roxy. That was on my father's side. But now, on my mother's side, Rafe Robinson, they found the records where he and his brother William, who lived in Clinton, Mississippi, about 15 miles west of Jackson. Those 2, Rafe and William, voted in every election during Reconstruction, up until the time when the terror reigned and Reconstruction was destroyed. And I said, wow, isn't that something? And there's a book by Lehman entitled Redemption, the Last Battle of the Civil War. You know what happened on September the 4th? There at Clinton, September the 4th, 1875, 50 blacks were massacred. 50 by white Democrats who were upset, who were mad because black people gain political power in the state of Mississippi. And they were like mad dogs, upset that blacks also were constables, sheriffs in Mississippi doing Reconstruction. And this kind of a backlash is made clear, and you understand why it happened. They were trying to suppress black political power, and they used terror to do it. And even in that massacre of 1875, a lady had to leave her baby in the trunk of a tree, fleeing from the violence. That happened to kill the black vote in the state of Mississippi and to enable whites to do what they call redeeming their power back. And the same thing is happening today. Same thing. All they're doing right now, they're acting out what Edward Ross said down there at Stanford in 1891. Who was Edward Ross? He was one of the fathers of sociology in America. And he at Stanford in 1891 coined the phrase, racial suicide. What was the theory behind that phrase? If white women didn't have more babies, the Western European would commit racial suicide. And the blacks, the Jews, the brown, the yellow and the red folks will outnumber us. In 1884, at the Democratic National Convention, what happened? One of the major planks in their platform was this: white women must have more babies, at least 4 to 6. And then fast forward to Mr. Environmentalist time, Mr. Theodore Roosevelt, president of this nation. He delivered a paper entitled True Americanism. What was that about? Any white woman who didn't have more babies should be considered a criminal. Fast forward, coming to our time, Pat Buchanan, who was toying with the idea of running for president in 2020. What did he say? I believe it was in Business Time periodical. White women must remember their obligation, their duty to have more children, or else these black, brown, and yellow folks will outnumber us. All of this jumping up and down, all of this brouhaha about abortion is not about reverence for life. It's a numbers game. And it's high time that people will come to see that's what it is. For these same persons who are talking about reverence for life and being, respectful of the baby in the womb, they're not concerned about that. But after the baby gets here, out of the womb, what do those same people do? They cut back on all measures for health care, for education, and those social services that others who are privileged have also benefited from in our society. So it is a game, I repeat. It's hypocritical. It's contradictory. But we ought to just understand that if we would just chill and become our brother and our sister's keeper and share, we won't have time for this dichotomous thinking of them against us and us against them. But that's what the politicians and the preachers too, who wanted power, control, prestige, and even money, have done, and it is to tell the lie that there's something wrong with us because we are black. and that they've got to watch out for us.
On the same day the U.S. Supreme Court struck down affirmative action, California has finalized its report on reparations for Black residents.
Why aren't our accomplishments as Black Americans recognized in American history?
The nearly 1,100-page report, 2 years in the making. The study details what it describes as ongoing and compounding harms experienced by African Americans as a result of slavery and its lingering effects on American society today. The report lists over 100 recommendations on how Black Californians can be made whole, including the state formally apologizing, return property unjustly seized from Black residents, and over policing and mass incarceration and wellness centers in historically Black neighborhoods.
This reparation, this first trial, would be lineage-based. That way you're able to go into this struggle and not become a victim of a whole lot of suits. But we base it on race, of whosoever wills may come. You got to deal with the fight of Proposition 209. So it was a matter of strategy, going back to what Mr. Evers told me at 15. Be smart and strategic. And then after we get something based on this lineage, then you come. The next stride for those on color. You got to be realistic, you got to be rational, and you got to determine how you're going to get some results. Or else what will happen, this document which I have right here, that I invited my staff to bring down here so you can see it, you're talking about over 1,000 pages. And it's well documented. The evidence is here. But if we are not smart and strategic and we are not astute lobbyists, what will it become at the end of the day? Nothing but another handsome, well done, well documented document, but put on the shelf to collect dust. And at the end of the day, it will do absolutely nothing to make life better for the masses of Black folk in this nation and in this state. And while speaking of the nation and the state, California is ahead of the United States. You know, we're still trying to decide whether we're going to even issue an apology. We ought to applaud California and my friend Governor Newsom for at least having the courage to move forward. Broach the idea of putting together the facts. These are the facts. These are the facts, I repeat. But we've got to take the facts and do something about it, and not be talking about what ought to be done, but how to. And that's how I feel that we can get some measurable outcomes. Now the next fight is, the next leg is to lobby the state Senate and the state Assembly. That's what the general public must understand too. This is just the first leg where we came together. They gave testimony. We listened to everybody. We moved over to the state. But after you've gotten the facts, you got to do something about them. And the doing involves all of us. We need to be going to that state capitol. We need to be talking with these representatives, the Senate, and the Assembly representatives, if we're going to have anything to happen. So that's why I respect and practically endorse what the founder and the originator had in mind. Legacy, based on those who are able to qualify on the basis, I repeat, of enslavement. And even though California was not a slave state, but the first governor, Peter Hartman Barnett, was an arch racist from Nashville, Tennessee. And he supported slavery. And even tried to keep black folks from settling in the state of California when he became governor back in 1849 of this state of California. And he got on the Supreme Court in the state of California, and the first civil rights case of the West involved, coincidentally, interestingly enough, a young man from my native state of Mississippi, R.C. Lee, who at the age of 19 was brought here by a man named Stovall, John Stovall, who was an enslaver in the northern Mississippi. He came out here to build a school and for health reasons. And he brought R.C. Lee here as an enslaved person to be hired out in California to make money for him to take care of his personal needs, and I repeat, build that school. But when this case, long short of it matter is, when this case got before the state Supreme Court, who had gotten on that court after he had left office in disgrace as governor? Peter Burnett. And Peter Burnett voted with the minority opinion that R.C. Lee should be sent back to Mississippi as a slave. But thanks to the Broderick and Baker brothers, an abolitionist family of whites, they prevailed and won, and R.C. Lee was set free here in California and was not sent back to Mississippi as an enslaved person. And then you had people here in California who were supporters of the Confederacy. So there was a ripple effect throughout the body politic throughout the 1850s and 1860s in the state of California, supporting denying us our constitutional rights and equal protection under the law. And even in 1858, what happened? Nearly 800 blacks got on that ship, the Commodore. It was April the 13th, 1858. There was a meeting at First AME Zion Church, and a man named Irishman named Negley overheard the fact that blacks couldn't serve on juries in this city. There was no education for us here. You couldn't get housing, employment. And he said, Governor Douglas up at British Columbia told me to tell you that if they won't accept you in San Francisco, get aboard my ship, the Commodore, and come on up to Canada. And that was known as the out-migration of 1858. So even way back there, this city, this state was not kind to us. Down there in the valley, there was another preacher named that was quite a scholar too, Allensworth. In 1908, he came up with the bright idea of replicating Tuskegee here on the West Coast and acquired that community down there. But what does the white people do? They poisoned the water, redirected the railroad track to keep these blacks from fulfilling their vision of a learning community. So that's my position on that. Dr. Weber, our dear lady, who gave us this vision, should be respected. And she said lineage-based. And I believe that. I support it. how in the younger set help. The first thing I would say is get some wisdom from an old saying from a preacher in Mississippi. Whenever you plow a field, you don't ever team up two old mules by themselves. And neither do you team up two young mules by themselves. You always team up an old mule with a young mule. Intergenerational. And one of our challenges is we erroneously assume that one generation had it all, has it all, and will have it all. No.